Welcome to session 46 of our weekly event series, where we bring in experts in tech to share insights about their careers and how they got started, how they developed their career, so that you can see what you could potentially apply to your own story. But of course, for those of you that have been to all 46 of our events, you notice that no two stories are alike. That said, there's usually a lot of takeaways that you can take from somebody's experience, which is why we think it's so helpful to have experts like Chloe with us on these sessions. And today's session is titled From Business Development to Product Management at Facebook and TikTok. And we're really happy to have Chloe Shih with us today. Welcome, Chloe.
Hi everyone. Thank you for having me.
So Chloe, of course, is a product lead today at TikTok. We're going to talk through her career today as well, but let me set the agenda and just have a few announcements here as we get started. You're gonna go through this introduction right now. Then we're gonna do a quick introduction from Chloe and hear about her story, and then we'll dive right into the discussion about how one can establish a career in product, and especially if you're coming from other disciplines, right? A lot of people have experience in other industries, or maybe have experience in other functions in tech, and they want to parlay that into a product management or eventually product lead role. So that's going to be the focus of the conversation today. And it does say the last 10 minutes is Q&A, but it's a little bit of a misnomer. You're going to be dropping questions throughout, and we're going to try to address them as we are going along. Just a quick announcement here that we are right now recruiting for our October 25th start date for our Tech Career Acceleration Program. That's an 8-week program where we get to learn from experts in tech about product, operations, sales, and marketing to get a well-rounded understanding of these functions and to develop skills across these different areas to decide what you should do with your career. So if you're interested, we encourage you to apply by going to school16.co/apply. And we're gonna have a survey that pops up at the end of this session. Please provide your feedback on how today's session went. We look at all this information to make sure that we're continuing to improve our weekly sessions for you, and we give you the best information possible. So that's it right there. I'll announce another event that we have coming up later on. It says here you are muted.
No,
can you still hear me? Okay. Okay, great. So Chloe, thanks so much for joining us. Let's start off the same way that we do most of these sessions. If you don't mind just giving us a quick, I guess, 3 to 4 minute or however short you want to make it, but overview of your career today, and then we're going to dive into the specifics.
Yeah, for sure. So right now I am the product lead at TikTok. I cover harassment and bullying as well as life safety. And basically I build like moderation tools and prompts to promote kindness and like figure out ways for people to be kind to each other online. And it's like, that's really difficult because Gen Z can get kind of mean. So just like figuring that out has been a huge part of social media development in the last couple of years. Before this, I worked on combating misinformation during the 2020 US elections, and also worked on our data privacy strategy when we got banned in India. So like a lot of big compliance things happening. And then before TikTok was at Facebook, I worked on Facebook groups and events, and just really worked on how people can come together on Facebook and create communities and like connect with each other, use all the different types of products and like interface them properly. And then when the pandemic hit, I launched live online events on FB Lite to get the next billion users. So that was a lot of my time there. Before Facebook was at a startup called Caffeine, which was backed by Andreessen Horowitz, as well as Greylock Partners and 21st Century Fox at 147 million at Series C. So when I joined, it was just like completely stealth mode. Like there's nothing announced, no website. And then there I did a lot of things. I did like QA, I did community management, I did marketing and analytics, and then I did like game dev relations. And then I made a huge bet into the creator industry, like the creator landscape. And I joined at a time when like the creator space was not that big. It was kind of like people were like, oh, that's not a real job, and what are you doing with your life kind of thing. But I made a big bet there and founded the creator partnerships team from the ground up, and essentially like flew down to LA every other week, meeting with all kinds of Hollywood agencies and gaming organizations, esports organizations to do big BD deals. And that was really fun. So if anyone's in gaming, I worked with a lot of OGs there. And then before that was at Google, working on like operations and analytics, and it was pretty straightforward. It wasn't like in a place where I really focused my career in, but it was like a good jump start. And then also worked in like other tech places. I worked at Boeing for a bit, and then worked at startups, and then helped on the data side. So that's kind of my journey from data operations to product development, or sorry, to business development, and then to product development and product management. Yeah.
Excellent. That's quite a story, and also quite a rapid ascent in a very short period of time. And I'd love to back up and maybe start at the beginning here, because you start off your career in roles that were a little bit different from tech. So you're working at startups, so you're also in Boeing. I'm curious, how did the beginning of your career come about in terms of like you deciding what roles you were going to take, and then how did you find that tech was the place you wanted to be?
My background was in industrial engineering and operations research. And I think like a lot of people in that field graduating from my program went into banking. And I just knew I did not want to go into banking because I didn't really gel with the classmates and like the Wall Street kids. I just felt I'm a very casual, quirky type person, and I wanted to keep that identity, and I'm not super buttoned up at all. I really enjoy, being my authentic self, and like I enjoy just bringing that part of my personality and not being dinged for that. So when I was making my career decision, I wanted to be around people who would value that part of me, and I felt that from what I've heard and what I've experienced, the tech industry was like the place to be for that kind of that kind of identity development. And then I also didn't want to go into the tech side of things. So I could have done software engineering, or I could have gone into the data science route. And I think I was like on this data science path, but ultimately I really enjoyed making large strategic decisions. Like, I think I like being at the, in the center, or in the decision-making meeting where we have to bring our company at the company level, what direction that we want to take it in. And I really value the technical sides of my skill set, but what I wanted to drive was like business direction, being able to like I guess disrupt a certain industry and make a huge splash. So I brought my career in that direction. Going from Google to the next role, I realized that when I was working there, I was really much in general tech. And it was really good for like a first job for me to understand the landscape of like org structures and what things look like at scale and what all the different disciplines are when a company is fully mature. But then I felt that it was too large and I didn't have enough scope to do something meaningful or impactful. And everything was just like very incremental. So then I also was really interested in like the entertainment side of the industry. For me, I wanted to dive into like be a domain expert, not really be a generalist. And the area I wanted to go into was entertainment and tech. So then I like met up with a bunch of tournament organizers, and I went to, like, if you're in San Francisco, the Folsom Foundry, went to game night, went to like Smash tournaments, and just like met people. Are these the type of people I want to surround myself with in the career? Are these people who will give me and like I feel happy every day? And the answer was like, yeah, I really like these types of people. So then I wanted to specialize in that realm and go in that direction. And then I took this opportunity to join Caffeine. At the time, actually, I was like deciding between two things. One is staying within Google and supporting the analytics team behind Pokemon Go, or I take this risk and join a startup. That was a hard decision.
So I do want to talk about that decision in a second here, but I'm curious that first step when you decided that tech was really the place where you could be your authentic self and not necessarily be kind of like the buttoned up, the corporate maybe person that some of your peers were. I'm curious, once you made that decision, how did you set yourself up then to be considered for these types of roles? I mean, in particular, Google, obviously super competitive. How did you get that opportunity to join at such a competitive company at such a young age?
It was so hard, to be honest. I remember starting out and getting my foot in the door. I didn't have that many connections, and the ones that I did, I didn't know how to make it past through the interview loops. So then I think I remember like sending out 150 applications and just like use the spray and pray method, and then have all kinds of iterations of my resume, and was picked up by recruiters. I think what was hard about my major was that it's not a perfect fit for any role within the industry. It's not like I majored in comp sci or double E and was able to just apply for software engineering roles. Like they wouldn't want my major. And if I wanted to be a true operations researcher, I needed to get like a PhD or at least a master's degree and like work at Amazon and figure out Amazon's algorithm for dropping off delivery packages in the most optimal way. And that wasn't like my thing. And I didn't want to go the consulting and finance and banking route. So it was honestly by brute force and sheer willpower, and I don't recommend it. Yeah, it's tough.
Okay. And so I think brute force oftentimes works very well, even though it's not the easiest approach,
It's not.
but how did you go about doing that? Like, what were some of the tactics that you used to create those opportunities for yourself?
So I didn't know what I really wanted at the beginning. All I knew was I went to a company's career page and you can see the departments. There's marketing, there's operations, there's biz dev, there's engineering, there's product. And then I just looked at which departments I thought I would fall into the best so I can like cut down on my choices. And so I think I looked into data as well as operations and like some type of BD type roles and then just apply to all of those. I had like 3 or 4 different types of resumes that would be a better fit for those particular, I guess, listings. And I also just like stalked a lot of my older classmates and looked at their LinkedIn's and see what degree they had and what their career narrative looked like, and see if I like was a match for that, and that would be a better alignment of like me as a candidate. Also, I think ultimately what was something that worked out much better was don't put everything on my resume that I've ever done in my life, but you really have to take things out. Like less is more sometimes, because you have to own that career narrative to show that you are the right fit. And then I also had the chance of working on a lot of entrepreneurial type projects. Like I was in a boot camp to start a startup in a week with Steve Blank, who was the mentor of Eric Ries, who wrote the Lean Startup, and then was able to put that on. And then like also took an agile project management course, and we worked with a startup, and that was like our client. I took a lot of those types of courses, and that padded the projects part. And I think those were the best things that helped differentiate me from like the rest of the candidates. Yeah.
Interestingly enough, when I was looking at your LinkedIn yesterday before this session, it was the motivation behind my LinkedIn post, because I noticed as I was scrolling through that all of your jobs had a product leaning description. So speaking of that personal narrative, it looks like at Facebook, that was your first official most product related role. I know it's product development, and maybe you can make the distinction between that and product management, but at what point did you go through your LinkedIn and make that update to make yourself to talk about the product oriented work that you've done?
Yeah, this is interesting because product is one of those pathways or careers where they don't allow people in unless they have product experience. And it sucks because it's not an entry level role. Like it's really hard to get into those APM, RPM positions, and not just like a small proportion of the entire industry gets to have that runway. So everyone else has to kind of transition in the way that, I don't know, in some creative fashion. So for me, when I was at Caffeine, I did really well in BD. Like I was really running partnerships. I met with a ton of agencies that worked with the top celebrities of entertainment. And I felt that from like a competency standpoint, I did really well, but from like a day-to-day who I want to be surrounded by, I felt like I really didn't fit in. It was kind of awkward for me to show up in like the 25th floor of this huge Hollywood building, and everyone's like has assistants and they're all buttoned up. And I felt like this wasn't my character. And it resulted in a lot of pretty uncomfortable conversations, to be honest. And so I think I was like reflecting internally around how or what direction I want to take my career and what I enjoyed day to day. And what I loved was like working with engineering and design. And at that time at the company, we didn't have like a product culture because our execs were ex-Apple, and Apple doesn't really drive by product, they drive by design. And so because I was a lead on figuring out what our what the voice of the user was, what our users are trying to say, what they want. I had to come up with the product specs and the briefs and like the prioritization. And so I was doing a lot of product related duties from a very early on. And I didn't change, like I could have changed my title, but we're a startup, like titles really didn't matter as much. And I just kept it as BD because that was a lot of my pride of my work. But I had been doing product for quite some time. And then that made it really difficult, however, to transition into a product role. I think I got a few product PM roles at like smaller or medium-sized companies that were just in spaces that I didn't really quite understand, like more B2B probably, or more like partnerships or services oriented. And I knew I wanted to stay in consumer, I want to stay in content creation and online communities. And so I got the job at Facebook, and it was a product development role. And that's different from PMing because product development is basically more like, how do you launch product at scale? So I had to come in and like work across or like 3 different huge departments of product teams and rallied like all of their roadmaps and try to make sure it worked out, and then make sure they're prioritized properly, make sure everything has the right briefs and the right reasoning that it will trickle up to our North Star, and just operationally like project manage basically the development of like maybe 9 different product teams and like 400 engineers and designers and data scientists. So it was very much leading multiple PM product teams at scale. And then I wanted to do that because I felt that at Facebook, and Facebook is very known for like pushing out really strong PMs. And I wanted to learn from what it looked like at the end state before, I guess, leading my own product org, I guess. And so I decided to just go there. And whenever I like talked about my product experiences, it's true. Like I no longer really talk about the BD side of my time at the startup. I really talk about like the product launches that resulted from all of the partners that I've worked with. And you have to, in the interview process, you really have to select those experiences so that you are highlighting yourself in the way that the hiring manager wants to, that you want the hiring manager to see you. So yeah, at what point I changed everything was when I was going for PM roles. Yeah.
And speaking of that, you went from this partnerships role at a startup, granted a well-funded startup with really respected investors, probably very well-connected company, et cetera.
Yeah.
From a partnerships role at this startup to a product development lead role at one of the biggest technology companies in the world, the most recognizable technology companies in the world. And I'm wondering, what was it about your experience at Caffeine that even got you the foot in the door for an interview at Facebook in the first place? And then maybe if you could touch on some of the nuances of what you did during that process to be the one that was selected for the product development lead role.
It was hard. I think that a lot of the interviews are hit or miss. Like, a lot of people have interviewed at a Google or a Facebook, and the hiring panels are put together kind of haphazardly. They just select from a random group of people that haven't, it's like, there's a whole process to it. And so you could get lucky and you have really nice interviewers who are able to pull out the right stories from you, or most of the time you get someone who's like too busy going from meeting to meeting. And sometimes you just like don't get it. So I've been rejected from Facebook a number of times actually. And I did interview back with Google and I got rejected. So it was for like a much different role. So it was fine. But I think that I just kept looking for different opportunities to see if that would be a good fit for my time in the career. And with all the stars aligned, I'll get the interview. And then to prep for those interviews, I really just had to just ask a lot of people who worked at Facebook in the similar roles, or like roles that worked with them, to understand the person's responsibilities, and then try to predict the business need of what they would need from the next person. And like, how can I select the stories in the short 30 minutes or 45 minutes in that interview to bring out the right highlights from my experiences, so they can be like, they can envision that I'm the perfect person for the role. And I think that at companies like Facebook and Google, if you're able to just make it to the interview stage and like meet the bar of competency, I think it's like all good. But I think it's actually harder when you go to smaller companies or medium-sized companies when they only have job recs or job openings for one spot, and they have to be like the perfect fit out of everyone. So like at Fang, you just have to meet the bar. But then at the smaller companies, you have to not only meet the bar, but be better than every other candidate. And so that I think is much harder to do, because you kind of have to get into the mind of like the hiring team to know like what exactly do they need differently from their current talent pool, and are you the right fit, and how can you like communicate that? So it's a lot of guessing what people want. Yeah.
Yeah. But I like that framing. I think trying to get into the head of the hiring manager who's actually trying to solve a problem by bringing you onto the team, that's really the key. And sometimes it's really just about asking the right questions during the interview process to extract that information.
Yeah, it really is. Yeah. And it helps being in tech so you can ask people, and because sometimes they won't tell you. Sometimes the recruiter doesn't know either. So having people who work kind of closely to those team members or people in that role helps you gauge what this role is about. And at larger companies, these roles are like feel really, really abstract. Like you're not really sure what they do until you do it. And sometimes you just need to ask around, honestly.
Yeah, you have to not be afraid of asking around. Great. Just a reminder, folks, to please start putting your questions in the chat or in the Q&A there so we can make sure we ask questions that you might have for Chloe. But my next question is now kind of leading into your current role at TikTok. So I'm curious what prompted the move from Facebook to TikTok, and then how you got your foot in the door in this organization in your role now.
Yeah. So they reached out to me, but I think a lot of people in tech knew that TikTok was aggressively hiring, and they were just reaching out to literally everyone on LinkedIn in particular. And so for me, it was because Facebook and like the bigger companies, actually, I had an opportunity to transition teams and work on Facebook Marketplace under Deb Liu, who was the VP of product at the time. And she was like, join my team, Chloe. And I was like, oh my God, this is a huge change in my career. I need to think about it. And ultimately, I just felt that if I stayed at Facebook, my scope would be pretty small. Like I'm not like on the leadership team. I am very far from being a director. And when you're at a company of that size, it's really difficult to make a huge big bet moves within your career path. You're really like optimizing things. And I think that's fine. There's a lot of great discipline, but I think what I needed from my career was to be able to own an insane amount of scope and then make a huge call on a strategic decision, and then establish that strategy and like communicate that out and rally an entire global team. I really wanted that experience under my belt. And I felt that TikTok was very well positioned for that, especially because there was like 30 people in my department at the time. So there's a lot of opportunity for leadership. Yeah.
Got it. So they came to you, they were aggressively recruiting. So they found you on LinkedIn, they reached out to you. And was it specifically for this lead product role, or did you create that scope that role for yourself?
Yeah. So it was for the role. I was staffed on a different team. I was on content account safety. And that's when I was like working on things like content moderation and account moderation. When we had a lot of different users spit out misinformation, it was really, really, it was a lot of work. There's a huge teams that work on taking down bad content on TikTok. We get a lot of it. I mean, any huge social media platform will get a lot of it. And so I think trust and safety was like is this discipline within tech that every large company needs to have down. And if they don't have down, it could really hurt it could be huge PR risks. It could hurt their stock. It could hurt future talent coming in. There's a lot of risks if we don't have a strong trust and safety team. So I wanted to understand, what is that? And then my background is in live streaming. That's what Caffeine was all about. So then I pitched this whole moderation team and was able to lead the live safety moderation efforts at TikTok. Yeah.
Wow. It sounds really cool. So I'd love to hear a little bit about what that means. And generally joining a company like TikTok that obviously is growing so fast, at a role like this that's so important, sounds kind of intimidating. So I'm curious, kind of I know you've been there for a little over a year. I'm curious to hear what that first month in the job was like. I mean, did you kind of get your hands dirty right away? How did you know what to
Uh,
do in the role? Was it pretty autonomous, or
it
yeah, or
was
did you plan for things
hard.
like that?
It was so hard, not because I couldn't, get up to speed with the systems in play, but because it's a global team. And actually, not a lot of people think about this, but a lot of our colleagues are in Beijing, like engineering, algorithms, a lot of PMs. So then half of our documents are in Chinese and everything's translated. And we have a lot of global team meetings at night because that's when China wakes up. And a lot of people aren't able to speak English fluently. So we have interpreters on every call, on like big calls. So then, we'll have the China team speaking and they speak in Chinese, and then you can toggle interpreter and you hear the interpreters simultaneously translating on the spot. So you hear their voice, and then you speak in English and someone else translating on top of you and they're speaking in Chinese. That's what the China team hears. So a lot of it was honestly, the struggle was like communication on very much the rudimentary like communication, like language barriers, finding the right keywords, saying things that weren't translated properly. And within tech, it's already hard enough that everyone speaks the same language and like figuring out what the heck people are doing. So then when you add that component in, it's just it's so different. It was the first time I've ever really felt like I needed to expand my cultural understanding beyond just the US. So also what's interesting is like working at Facebook and a little bit of Google is, I think I'll speak, my opinion on Facebook. Facebook is like, they take US solutions and copy paste that into other markets and they'll make minor tweaks. So for the first time, I'm working for a product or a company that isn't US centric. So then US is still a huge market, but to know that other markets behave in such drastically different ways, it was like a huge wake-up call, like on the product front. I can't just pull US users, get their feedback, and then apply it for markets like Indonesia or I don't know, in like Brazil or Germany. Like people behave so differently. So I think it was really humbling from like a cultural understanding perspective. Yeah, that was like the biggest challenge going in.
And so can you talk a little bit about what the day-to-day looks like of a product lead in your function? I know you're a part of a kind of a very specific team within TikTok, but what does a product lead do in the company? What does your day look like?
I think it looks very different at every company. But for me, we own we own a North Star metric for sure. And that is a huge, that's like, oh, if you're on Facebook groups, it was like, if you're on the growth team, it's X number of meaningful connections made in a group, or X number of meaningful groups. And what that looks like is a meaningful group looks like X number of members, X number of interactions, and then daily activity, whatever, and that hits the threshold. And then we have a chart that like increases hopefully over time. And so you lead a team of engineers on clients like iOS and Android and server side and QA, as well as one or two designers, one or two data scientists, and UX writer, and maybe a UX researcher, and then any like stakeholders within your function. So if you're in monetization, you'll own, you'll work very closely with legal and payments and compliance. Within trust and safety, we have issue owners that are like the experts on a certain issue vertical, like violent extremism or harassment and bullying or hate speech or illegal goods and stuff like that. So they will own the global strategy, and they have the global bird's eye view of everything within this issue. And then they are the stakeholders that feed you or like they collaborate with you as the product lead on what the information you need to know to go own entire problem set. So you as a product lead have to lead this cross-functional team, as well as like manage the PMs within your site, and come up with like long-term strategies to get TikTok or your company to the level that you want. Like if we want this company to be the industry lead on online communities or on creator monetization or on trust and safety, what are all the players out there and how do we go beyond that? Yeah, so that is what the role is. The day-to-day is a ton of meetings, a ton of documentation, like literally so much writing and so much deliberation, a lot of research in terms of getting the right pieces of data, working with data science to extract that information from the platform, and a lot of like competitive landscaping research, just like be able to reference super in-depth research articles and say that this is what's happening and trending in the market, and that these are the benchmarks that we need to hit to be competitive and be a strong option, or maybe be the number one option for our users to get to that level. Yeah, it's it's a lot of work.
I bet. Well, that's why you have the word lead in your title. So
Uh,
quick reminder to folks, we have about 20 minutes left in the conversation. So this is the time to drop your questions to make sure that we can catch them. But, it seems, Chloe, like you basically, the most formal product training that you had was basically what you did yourself and figured out yourself at Caffeine. Correct me if I'm wrong.
oh
But
yeah.
yeah. So then it almost seems like you skipped a level where you, sorry, I just hit circuit, where you went from a BD role where you had a product. We obviously had the on the ground product management experience you were collecting while you were going along, but then you became a product development lead, and now you're product lead, and you've been leading product managers and engineering teams and designers and all that stuff for quite a while. So kind of a two-part question. One, did you ever feel imposter syndrome because of this? And two, how did you bridge the gap in the skill set there if you did not have the formal training?
Yeah, I think that's a hard one. Imposter syndrome, I don't usually, I don't think I felt it in a long time. But I do worry, like, will this work out? But in terms of imposter syndrome, I don't think I felt it as much. It was really when I first started my role at the startup, because that was like, I went from Google, which is super structured, managers are trained, and they tell you exactly what you need to do, to like a place where nobody has time for you and you just have to figure it out. And you got to get the company to get to the next series funding, to potentially IPO, or just to have huge people talking about you. And that is much harder. The skill gap there, when I was like trying to bridge within BD, was I worked with my VP, and she was able to refer me to several people within her network to like mentor me outside of the company, because there's like no one within the company. There's like not a lot of people. So I think I had to just get external mentors and like make sure I know what industry level competency looks like, and I have to replicate that, or sort of show that within my role. As I was transitioning to product, that was a really difficult thing to do. Thankfully, I had a senior PM that I knew, and he was kind enough to mentor me and coach me, like go through interview practices. We did mocks like a couple times a week. He would grill me on all kinds of questions. I'd be sweating and be like, I don't know, that's a really hard question. And then he would walk me through some of the PRDs he wrote and like some of the product strategy that he's been thinking through. And that would help me understand the role of product within tech. And once I like understood that from a high level, I don't think I really had that much imposter syndrome, because I noticed that everyone joining a new company, or even people, I'm in consumer tech, in media, in content creation, in online communities. Everyone doing this is doing it for their first time. Like maybe they were huge hotshots back in MySpace days or Yahoo days, or I don't know, IBM days. But no one's ever done this industry yet. So me joining live streaming and gaming and creator space, like I am much closer to the user base, I guess age-wise, than some of my most senior execs, and they were really leaning on me to provide that analysis. And I felt that was a huge reason why I wanted to go into this industry, because like I felt I understood the user base. If I were to go into fintech or medical tech or biotech, I would feel total imposter syndrome. I would be like, I do not belong here whatsoever. I know nothing. Yeah. So this was where I wanted to be. In terms of like more trying to close the skill gap on understanding the landscape, I think this was a huge effort. I mean, I read a ton of product books. I think a lot of people know what the product books are. Like there's Decode and Conquer, there's Inspired, there's like Design of Everyday Things or something. I read a ton of those books. I read a lot of leadership books, because a lot of leadership in product. And I think that those are helpful, but nothing is more helpful than understanding the problems on your team and like you asking yourself genuinely, are you solving that problem? Like if there's an org challenge and you have some sort of you do a team bonding. Is this team bonding going to solve that org challenge? If it's not, you're not doing anything. You're putting more work on yourself, and it just makes you feel worse that you tried something, it didn't work, and you call yourself a failure. Like that's not okay. So I think just genuinely looking at the problems I'm trying to solve, and then like doing a gut check to be like, if I were on the other side of this problem, do I feel like this is solved for me? And if that answer is like no, then I have more work to do. Yeah. And I think I'm okay. I'm really okay with asking super dumb questions. I'm okay with being vulnerable with things I don't know. And I'm okay with asking for help. And that has always helped me, unless I worked with people who have different values. That's a whole other story. But that helped me get through the skill gaps.
That's great. And, I think that's really important because a lot of people, especially if they're entering a new setting like that, where, you have a lot of new colleagues, different stakeholders, it's a big company. Some people may feel intimidated by going to other people for help, asking those quote unquote dumb questions. But that's how you kind of cut through the BS and actually figure out what are these problems that need to get solved so that you can add value immediately.
Yeah, and I noticed that whenever I asked a question, someone would message me after and say like, "Oh, thank God you asked. I had no idea what was going on." And I'm like, "Surely I am not the only person thinking this." Yeah.
Exactly. And I think especially in a product role where it literally sits in the middle of so many different departments, you're managing different stakeholders, priorities and the like, that's your job. You're the master question asker, if you will, and the person that connects all the dots. And fundamentally, if that's something that you're uncomfortable with, you have to get pretty comfortable with it quickly if you want to be in product.
Yeah, for sure. Yes, I agree.
And another thing, Chloe, that you mentioned before we go on to the question that was asked by somebody in the audience is it seems like you were really, really deliberate for a while in which industry you go into and if it matches your experience and more importantly, your interests. You mentioned that this is where you develop your domain expertise and maybe you would have imposter syndrome in completely unrelated area, but that's really important for people to consider because you have to care about the market that you are solving problems for. If you don't, it's going to be much harder for you to actually solve those problems. The first question that we have from somebody anonymous is, you mentioned that you had rejections obviously along the way, as anybody does, even at companies that you worked with. Did you ever reach out to these organizations for feedback on why you were rejected?
I think I knew why I was rejected. I think sometimes people will just tell me in the feedback conversation. And it's usually things like I wasn't technical enough in like if I was going for a quant role or a data science role. And then that helps me. Well, I guess, yeah, some of some of the quant roles I definitely like didn't do well in the interviews, and I totally am fine with it. And it's because I guess my strengths are elsewhere, and I just needed the data part to be a skill set for me to at least like speak the language or run a few queries on my own if I needed to. But I think many times when I got feedback, that the ones that I listen to are the ones that make sense for my career development. Like if I really wanted that role and I got feedback that I wasn't at par what they were looking for, I just wanted to like gut check myself. Was that even something that I really want to aspire to be? Like that feedback, is it valid for me and is it relevant for me in my future? Do I want like future Chloe to look like this person? And if that's yes, then I'll definitely listen to it. If it's no, which is like sometimes most of the time it happens, to be honest, interviewing is so random and you never know what is on the other side and what people are dealing with. Oftentimes the rejections come from a place where it's like not a good fit, and I think that's better. Like that helps close my doors and I won't have like analysis paralysis where I have multiple decisions to figure out. So it helps me focus on the areas of my career that I should be focusing my time on. Some of the feedback I guess I can share that I'm struggling with right now is maybe I I think this is hard, but I don't think I do that great of a first impression. I think for me, the type of leadership that I have is really facilitative and I ask a lot of questions. I'm not very alpha, which is why I didn't do super well in terms of like culturally in BD, because a lot of the BD people are very alpha, I'm gonna say. And I am a little bit too gentle. Yeah, and that works really well in the long run. Like if you're spending your time and asking the right questions and trying to get more information from the other person and guiding them along the way, I think that drives really good long-term results. But when I'm in a team of power players who are looking for quick answers and some people who are really, really clear and determined on what their answer should be, I normally seem a lot more junior or less decisive, and that's not a trait that they're looking for in like higher leadership. So I think that is a piece of feedback that I'm not sure how to work through right now, because I really like the way I interact with people. But in an interview setting or like in a first meeting setting, I probably don't have like as strong as an impression, but I know that I normally last compared to some of the peers I work with. Yeah.
Yeah, it's so important to be in an environment where leaders, certain types of leaders, recognize the strengths that you do have and how you communicate versus trying to take it at face value just because you're not alpha, making assumptions about who you are or what you're capable of doing based on, you know, how outspoken you are or how loud you are in a room. I think culturally some companies are changing now, so it's a little bit better. But I do want to touch on that. One of those aspects that, you know, you mentioned, which I think a lot of people are nervous about, especially if they're applying to product roles, which is hearing that feedback that you're not technical enough. How did you overcome that eventually?
I think well, it depends on how technical I want to be. And maybe there are certain parts of the technical thing, like what is technical? Is technical being able to break down a problem and be really specific and particular about your framework, your information hierarchy, or is it working with engineering? Some people think that if you don't know how to speak or understand engineering sprints and size, like how long something would take, and then be able to call BS when an engineer is like, oh, it's going to take a month. And you're like, no, this is a 2-week thing. Is that technical, or is it running your own SQL queries and building your own dashboard? Like, I think define what technical looks like for the company and what it looks like for you and where you want to stretch yourself and grow. For me, I don't think I do that well working with maybe breaking down a theoretical problem and like showing exactly where things fall and where things are not great, because I just do horribly with theoretical situations. Like it could be anything. It really could. And then in real life, it's never what we might think, because it takes so much more deeper analysis that I find that the product interviews to be really arbitrary. And there's like a certain framework you can talk through, and there's like a game that you have to play, but it never matches to what the real life expectations are. And sometimes solutions are a lot hackier than what you would want than in a hypothetical situation. So I I I think that if a company is going to value me based on how intensely I can break down a hypothetical situation, I think it's not a good match for what I can do on the job. And it's fine, because there are plenty of companies out there. I will take that advice or feedback and like see how I can be more frameworked so that it makes sense in the interview setting. And it's a good skill set to have. But I think that that also attracts a certain type of talent that I may not want to work with per se. If people only speak in hypotheticals and throw frameworks at you, but not really do the actual work, then I'm not sure if I would actually gel with that culture. Yeah.
I like how deliberate and assertive you are with what you think makes sense for you. And I'm going to go ahead and assume that, you know, you may, I mean, however you consider yourself alpha or not, but when you're going into these meetings, or the interviews or meetings or whatever, it's pretty clear that you are confident and deliberate about what you think is the correct approach. Am I right?
Yeah, I wouldn't say I'm not not unconfident. Yeah, I would say I'm more like inquisitive. I just want to know what the right answer could look like and what all the options are. I think I'm more of like the researcher type. I don't think I come in with strong opinions. I come with just questions I really want to hear people's opinions on. Yeah.
Well, asking informed questions if they're good and informed, will position you as an expert. And I think that's oftentimes what people are looking for. Can we trust this person in this particular role with these other people, and asking the right questions oftentimes, and it comes back to that, is really important. Someone asked a question, how have your problem solving skills evolved as you changed some of these last few roles?
Problem solving skills. Did anything stay constant?
Yeah, so like you talked about how you read a lot of books and the like, and maybe that's where you learned problem solving frameworks, but maybe like between the last role and this role, where there's certain challenges that come into play and you have to tackle complicated problems.
I mean, in particular, you mentioned how when you were getting into this career, what was important for you is to be able to make strategic decisions in a company. And that's pretty intimidating when you have something that can impact millions and millions of users. So how do you go about pulling the trigger on some of these difficult decisions and solving these problems?
Oh, yeah, that's a hard one. I think as a product person, if you win, if you do well, then great, your entire team gets credit. But if you don't do well, like literally all the blame's on you because you made that call. So I think that a lot of the time, there's like a very, very strict validation process that we have to follow. And that is, qualitative analysis, user research, you get those like sentiment analysis, you get quotes, you get a group of 5 to like 25 people to tell you. And if you can predict a pattern, then there's like something there. Then there's like the quant approach of being able to, I don't know, figure out the funnel metrics of people clicking through certain features, and then figure out people are dropping off, figure out if people are using a certain tool or not, or using proxies to like accomplish something else. And that will help paint like more context to how the entire user base is behaving. And then there's like a bunch of reviews that you go through that you just like work with a ton of stakeholders. You pitch your idea, you pitch your why, you pitch your rationale, and they will pick every single part of your thinking and your proposal. I don't know if it's like that at the places that everyone else is working at or hoping to work at, but definitely at Facebook and Google and TikTok, it's very, very tiring and strict. Like the reviews are endless. So at that point, you're most likely extraordinarily convinced that this is the right way to do it. And if you're not, you just A/B test it. And then you also have to like make a big pitch to A/B test which parts go into the experiment groups and which one and for how long and what your purpose is. So you're always using engineering resources and data resources. So you have to be very, very pointed. And I think that over time, my problem solving abilities to like communicate and delineate which parts we need to test and which we need to validate and which I have a strong hunch on has like helped a lot, because at the end of the day, my question is like, do I want to waste my teammates' time doing this? Or do I feel confident we can go? And what's the risk if we don't do it? And if we do it, if it's something that is very PR risky, like we need to validate something for privacy or for payments, and that's like a huge issue, we need to validate every part. Like we need everyone to say yes. Like if this wasn't just me decision, we did our due diligence on every discipline. But if it's something that's like just a delightful experience, then it could be really easy. You just work with the internal team, you just have a couple of gut checks, and then you design it and you have some metrics, and that's okay. So it depends on like the risk level of the space, the problem you're trying to tackle, and your confidence in if things go wrong, how will you defend yourself? Yeah.
The last question we'll ask is from Liam Scott. And Liam asked, he thanked you for being here, and he asked if you could talk a little bit about your impact within content moderation at TikTok, and if the impact that you do have is a big driving force for you want to do the work that you do.
Yeah, definitely impact is a huge driving force, but impact is really hard to define because it could be within your colleagues, like org structure, being a good teammate, being a good leader, or specifically on the user base itself. Like what do you want out of your career? What kind of, I guess, career milestones or like headliners do you want? I think that's a really broad question. within content moderation, I honestly didn't understand the space very well. And going into it, it was very difficult. I think most companies will staff a third-party contracting team to manually review every piece of content that goes through any system. And that's cool, but not sustainable. Then you'll have like huge vendor teams to manage, and you have to like figure out payroll and figure out when to lay people off or hire new moderators, figure out training. So every big company has that, but I think there are more and more companies, or the trend is to go more the algorithmic approach and build an ML model for every piece of content, and have like also people to label all the different videos or profile pictures or bios that we think these keywords, these set of content or assets are bad. And I think that is like the direction of this industry. So my impact within content moderation on TikTok was more of like an ML, like heuristics based approach than like a human moderation approach. And I think that's been really fascinating to see, because like you see patterns, you see trends of bad behavior, and you want to mitigate that before it takes like X amount of SLA time to get to a human reviewer. So how can you predict those patterns, or like figure out those patterns, predict people's behavior, and like implement it out within algorithms and engineers team? In terms of like my current impact, actually, this is a tricky one. Within trust and safety, usually TNS defines their North Star based on what's policy violating. So whatever they have on their community guidelines or their terms of service, they cannot have on the platform. So usually trust and safety will mitigate bottom line risk, like the riskiest things they do not want. But within the social and content space, there's a lot of gray area. Like if you bully me, is that considered bullying under CG, or just I think it's bullying? And does it matter? And oftentimes you'll hear creators or users like report stuff and then nothing will happen. And that's mostly because it's not within the guidelines that we have written, and policy is always lagging, not leading with an industry. And same thing with law, same thing in government. And so my area of impact is within this gray space of giving power back to the user so they can determine for themselves what they want to moderate. Yeah. So that impact is like not, it doesn't move North Star for my department. So I have to completely like redefine what this space means, what success in this space means, and like share with stakeholders why it's important. Yeah.
Got it. Well, thank you so much, Chloe, for sharing your insight. I think some of the big takeaways for me are what we talked about earlier on in terms of being really deliberate about knowing what you want, or at least thinking about it deliberately, thinking about also how you communicate your story, your personal narrative. No one really talks about that. And I'm glad that you were really transparent about how you did that yourself, because that's how you get the best jobs, is you actually focus on what you think the other side is looking for, and then you communicate it essentially back to them. And some of that's guessing, some of that might be a little bit of luck depending on who interviews you. You're totally right. But most importantly, I think a lot of people do think you have to talk about your whole story and everything amazing that you did, but other people primarily only care about solving their own immediate issues, and that's what you have to address. So that was a huge takeaway for me. Folks, really quick announcement here. If you want to hear about future events just like this one, you can follow us on Instagram at School16Co, or on LinkedIn, just type in School16. We are a school there. And then next Wednesday, please join us with Genesis Hinckley, who's a product specialist at Google. This is her first job out of college. So we're going to be talking to somebody that's a little bit earlier on in their career, but definitely also thinking about what might be that next step after Google. Thanks so much, everybody, for joining and your insightful questions. And Chloe, of course, thank you so much for joining us today and sharing your insight as well.
Yeah, thank you for hosting me, and thank you for everyone who's on this call. I hope you're able to have some of your questions answered.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Appreciate your candor and all the answers that you had. I don't know if you've done public speaking in the past, but my sort of unsolicited feedback to you is you're really good at taking difficult questions and breaking them down and answering them in a really clear way. So I really appreciate that you were able to do that kind of on the fly here for this event, which is so valuable for our attendees. So thank you, Chloe.
Wow, that's high praise. Thank you. Appreciate it. Thanks for your patience with working with me as well. Happy to help out. If anyone has questions, feel free to share my email if that's helpful. Thanks again to the both of you for even starting this entire series. I think it's very helpful for all the people who are on the call. Yeah.
Thank you, Chloe. And folks, if you want to take Chloe up on that offer, shoot us a note either on LinkedIn or on email, info@school16.co, and we'll see if we can connect you with Chloe. Thanks so much. We appreciate your time.
Have a great rest of your day, everyone.
All right,
Bye, everybody.
Have a good one.
Bye.